So as a DM, I do tend to run my own adventures. I do tend to run my own campaigns. But every now and then, I will pull off something from the shelf, pre-written. There's a lot of great community content out there. There's a lot of kind of the best top 10 modules from each edition of D&D. Some are easier to update than others, but even so, you could take one of these amazing modules and in that moment, convert it along the way. You've got the framework. So within that question, how long does it take to run a D&D module? How can we set this up? Well, the first thing I look at in answering that question, it's more of kind of a formula that we want to try and optimize as a DM. And we've been exploring some different D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, DM, Dungeon Master skills to explore. The first thing in asking the question is how long is the module going to run? Well, how long, right? I'm looking at my shelf and I've got all my classic modules. How long do we want it to run, right? Different gaming groups have different focus and the ability to attend a gaming session. I don't want something that's going to last 4 or 5 gaming sessions and people are kind of burnt out and they're just like, look, we just want this to end. Fight the boss, right? That D&D burnout. Likewise, I don't want it to just end halfway through a session or end so quick where the players are saying, Fritz, we're having a great time. Like, what do you mean the adventure's over? That was the final encounter? We thought that was just the lead-in. So taking into account this kind of moving formula with moving parts, what is the makeup of the adventuring party, the actual physical adventuring party? And also, what are the levels of the player characters? That's important too, because player characters at lower levels, there's a lot you can do, but just by the nature, the structure of D&D, there's less options that you have, right? Think about a magic user, a wizard, a sorcerer. At the lower levels, you've only got so many spell slots to burn. Likewise, then you're limited by the spells that you can cast, level 1, 2, and 3. But as you advance, now you've got more and more spells. You've got more and more options. There's ones with different spell effects. Larger parties, more advanced parties tend to take a little bit longer for encounters. Not always. I mean, you can get tactical at any level, but lower level adventures tend to play faster. How many players do I have in the group? Big difference between 4 players and 10 players. Admittedly, I like big D&D games. If you said, Fritz, here's a table, what do we want to do? I'm like, look, get 8 to 10 players. I'll do this. Let's do this. Let's pull in a lot of players. But more players without optimization, the longer it'll take. And then, of course, likewise, the D&D experience of the players themselves. Someone newer to D&D, and it's okay to look stuff up. I've got so many editions of D&D in my head that it's just kind of all mixed in there. So occasionally I'm like, well, I think this was the rule, but then I'm like, wait, that was from 4th edition D&D. I say that because it is absolutely okay to make a call as a DM. It's okay as a player to not know everything about your character class, especially if you've just leveled up and you've got some new dailies or you've got some feats or some powers or some whatever, some new spells, to go look at the rules. But from that framework, newer players are going to have to look up more. That's going to slow things down a little bit. So I look at that and I select a module. That's the first piece. Ideally, what I'm looking to do is throw enough D&D at you where you get pumped, whether this is over 1, 2, or 3 sessions. You get pumped. You get excited. You're like, this is amazing. And then at that moment where you're at the height of that like D&D pump, we end the adventure. Winner takes all. Final boss encounter or final encounter. Then we shut it down. So right away you're like, you're left on that kind of like D&D high. You're left at that point where you're like, this is amazing. I could do another 4 hours. What do you mean the adventure's over? Like, no, we're coming back next week. Pull something else down. I want to keep that enthusiasm going, cascading from adventure to adventure to adventure. So for me, we now also need to define into that matrix, into that formula. Well, like what's an average D&D session? I can only talk now on that. There was a time, admittedly, I was probably playing too much D&D, but it was good. It was good for where it was, where I was in that moment. in my life, right? We're doing this D&D thing, but we have other obligations outside of it, family, work, friends, and school, other goals to accomplish. Yes, I want to funnel enough time into D&D. I framework that because at that time, I was able to play D&D all Saturday, every Saturday. And I mean that. This was like, we'd get up there at about 9 o'clock in the morning. Everything's set up. And we're doing the Dwarven Forge. We're doing the miniatures. We're doing everything. So Friday night was like, prep it. Saturday, we would play from 9 to like 10:30 at night, 11 at night. I mean, it was fantastic. That, for me, is not normal D&D. And we kept that up for like 6 or 7 months. It was intense. It was a lot of fun. So within that framework, I ran a massive D&D campaign. I say that because on the opposite side, there's been some times where I played D&D, or a recent example, I was at one of the gaming shops playing some war games. And one of the D&D tables, right, they're set up because it was also D&D night, but I'm there doing the Warhammer 40K thing. And it's about a 3-hour open window of playing. And the DM didn't arrive, so the players are kind of waiting around. And there's other DMs, and they're trying to figure things out. The DM's on his way. The DM's not going to make it. The DM's going to make it. The next thing you know, they're like, okay, the DM's not going to come. Well, the other DMs running their adventures were already well into the adventure for the evening, and I had finished playing Warhammer 40K. I got completely destroyed, which is good. You know, it's what it is. And I'm just kind of hanging out, and they're like, well, the store manager was like, hey, Fritz runs some D&D. Can you step in? Now, one of the things that I've explored, I've pushed up to the archive here. As a DM, I've always got virtually like 5 or 6 little quick adventures, more like a framework, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, in my back pocket, ready to go. Like I can sit down and throw a little D&D at you and get that experience. We had 1 hour to play. And it was a hard stop 1 hour because at 10 o'clock the store closes and you're out of there. And I respect that. I do, because they got to zero out the register and, you know, did that whole retail thing. I respect that. So we're out of there in an hour. It's like 9. We've got an hour to play. I can run an adventure in an hour. It's not a glorified encounter. It's got some bite, and we'll talk about that. But obviously that's going to be vastly different if I only have an hour. So the question is, what for you, we're building this formula, is a D&D session going to be like? I think for me, on average, it's about 2.5 to 3 hours. A little bit more if we're playing virtual. One of the nice things about virtual D&D, and there's advantages and disadvantages. Virtual D&D, you're playing it, then when you're done, you're already at home, or back in your room or dorm room, wherever, or sometimes at work I'll run it. I don't have a travel time to and from the place to play. So what this means is, if, depending on where you are, if it's a 10 o'clock end, right, if we're going to play till 10 at night, and then you've got 45 minutes to an hour to get home, that's got to be banked in. So you might end at 9 because you're like, look, I've got a commute. And I'm sensitive to all of my other players, right, whether they're local or a little bit of a distance. But if you're playing virtual, you can go to 10 o'clock, no problem, because as soon as it ends, that's it. You're there. So a virtual D&D gaming session is different in time outlay than an old school. Can we even call it old school? Or I should say, can we even call it traditional? There's a lot of ways to play D&D. Direct tabletop experience. But if you asked me right now, looking at the past couple of years of D&D play, on average, I would say a session once a week, about 3 hours. Maybe we go a little bit more. Maybe we go a little bit less. So when someone says, Fritz, can you run a D&D module for us? Or I'm feeling like pulling something off the shelf to play. Because again, there's a lot of really, really great classical modules. That's the formula that I pull out. At most, I'd like it to go 2 gaming sessions. I'd like the first one to be building the story, give you some encounters, maybe a mini boss to fight, so I can do that role-playing thing and taunt you and talk down to the party, get them pumped up. Then in the second gaming session, flip the script where everything you thought you knew you did not know, but you uncover it, and now you're going into the boss fight. At the end of the session, winner take all. 2 sessions for a module is kind of where I want to be. There are some really good modules that are just ready to bake and play in 1 session. You could play one that's 3, but now I find when I'm getting into 3 or more play styles, play sessions, things kind of tend to slow down, or they tend to kind of drag on. But again, that would be different if it's like, look, we only have an hour and a half to play D&D. Then an average module right there, you're looking at 3 to 4 hours. But that's a little bit more sustainable because you're approaching it from those little bite sections. So how long should a D&D module take to play? How long do you want to play it? 1 to 2 sessions. Most of the time, 2 sessions would be my vote. Agree or disagree?